A millionaire CEO gave his cleaning lady an impossible engineering task that his entire team of PhDs couldn't solve. What she did in just 60 seconds didn't just solve the problem, it shattered everything he believed about intelligence, success, and the invisible people he'd been overlooking his entire life. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city and country in the comments below. It's incredible to see our Deep Stories family growing across the globe. If you believe that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places, that everyone has a story worth knowing, and that true intelligence has nothing to do with job titles or degrees, hit that subscribe button right now. This is Daniel and Sophia's story, a tale of hidden genius, devastating loss, and discovering that sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one everyone's been ignoring. Let's begin. Daniel Cross had built his tech empire on one unshakable belief, that brilliance belonged exclusively to those with the right degrees, the right backgrounds, and the right pedigree. At 42, he was the kind of CEO who commanded a room just by walking into it. Sharp jawline, perfectly tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and eyes that could dissect a business proposal in seconds. He was ruthless, demanding, and had a particular hobby that absolutely terrified his employees: the impossible challenge. Every single month, like clockwork, Daniel would present his executive team with what he called innovation tests. These weren't your typical business problems. These were complex engineering puzzles, mathematical nightmares, problems that supposedly had no solution. He'd offer $50,000 to whoever could crack it. But it was never really about the money. It was about power. It was about watching his Harvard and MIT graduates squirm in their expensive chairs, about reminding everyone in that boardroom that despite all their credentials and accomplishments, he was always the smartest person in the room. His corner office on the 40th floor was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern art that cost six figures, a desk made from reclaimed wood that had once been part of a historic building. Everything about Daniel's world was designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind everyone who entered of the hierarchy. And he sat firmly at the top of that hierarchy, looking down at everyone below. At the very bottom of that hierarchy, so far down she might as well have been invisible, was Sophia Rivera. For 3 years, Sophia had cleaned the executive floors of Cross-Tech Industries. She arrived at exactly 10 p.m. every night when the offices were empty and silent. She pushed her cleaning cart through the marble hallways, her footsteps echoing softly in the darkness. She wore a simple teal uniform with coral trim, kept her dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail, and had perfected the art of being invisible. Not just physically invisible, emotionally invisible. She'd trained herself to become a person who took up no space, made no sound, left no impression on anyone's memory. The executives who worked late would walk right past her without a glance. Sometimes they'd leave their coffee cups on desks, their papers scattered everywhere, their whiteboards covered in half-finished ideas. Sophia would clean it all up, restore order to their chaos, and disappear before dawn like she'd never been there at all. But here's what nobody knew, what nobody could have possibly guessed. That woman in the teal uniform, the one everyone ignored, the one whose name most employees couldn't even remember, she had once been one of NASA's most promising aerospace engineers, Dr. Sophia Rivera. 2 PhDs, one in aerospace engineering, one in applied mathematics. She'd worked on calculations for Mars mission trajectories. She'd been in rooms with the brightest minds in the world, solving problems that would determine humanity's future in space. She'd published papers that other scientists referenced. She'd been brilliant, ambitious, unstoppable. And then 5 years ago, everything shattered. It was a Tuesday. Sophia remembered that detail with painful clarity. It had been a Tuesday. She'd been working on a critical deadline, a calculation that couldn't wait. Her daughter Emma had called from school, asking when Mommy was coming to pick her up. "Soon, baby," Sophia had said, eyes never leaving her computer screen. "Mommy just needs to finish this one thing. Mrs. Chen will pick you up today, okay?" Emma was 8 years old. She loved butterflies and wanted to be an astronaut just like her mom. She had her mother's dark eyes and her father's bright smile. She was everything good in Sophia's world. The accident happened at 3:47 p.m., a driver running a red light, Mrs. Chen's car with Emma in the back seat. The impact was instantaneous. Emma never suffered, the doctors said, as if that was supposed to make it better. Sophia had been finishing her calculation when she got the call. She'd actually felt proud of herself for solving the problem. She'd been smiling when her phone rang. The guilt was suffocating. It pressed down on Sophia's chest every single day, making it hard to breathe. She couldn't look at equations without seeing Emma's face. She couldn't step into a laboratory without hearing that last phone call, Emma's little voice saying, "I love you, Mommy," before hanging up. She couldn't be the brilliant Dr. Rivera anymore because Dr. Rivera had chosen work over her daughter, and her daughter had died because of that choice. So Sophia walked away from everything. From NASA, from her research, from colleagues who called her a genius. She walked away from the career everyone had predicted would change the world. She took the first job that required nothing from her mind, just her hands, just her silence, just her presence. She needed to disappear. She needed to become no one. She needed to punish herself by erasing the person. Daniel's challenge this month was different. He'd been particularly smug when he presented it to his executive team, that self-satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. It was an optimization problem for their new satellite communication system, a way to reduce latency by 30% without increasing power consumption. Every industry expert Daniel had consulted said it was theoretically impossible. The laws of physics simply didn't allow for it, and that's exactly why Daniel loved it. He wanted to watch his expensive team of geniuses bang their heads against an impossible wall. For 2 entire weeks, his team had tried everything. His chief technology officer, Marcus Chen, who had graduated at the top of his class from Stanford and had 3 patents to his name, had burned through 3 different assistants and countless sleepless nights. He'd filled 11 whiteboards with calculations, crossed them all out, and started over at least 6 times. His lead engineer, Dr. Rebecca Walsh, who'd been personally poached from SpaceX for an absolutely obscene salary, had run simulation after simulation. She'd tried 17 different approaches, consulted with former colleagues, even reached out to professors from MIT. Nothing worked. The rest of the team wasn't doing any better. They'd brought in consultants. They'd pulled all-nighters. They'd ordered enough coffee to keep a small country awake for a month. The conference room looked like a war zone, empty energy drink cans, crumpled papers, whiteboards covered in crossed-out equations, the physical evidence of intellectual defeat. Even Daniel himself had spent hours on the problem, though he'd never admit to anyone that he couldn't solve his own challenge. He'd sit in his office late at night, staring at the equations, feeling that uncomfortable itch of a problem that wouldn't yield. It bothered him more than he wanted to acknowledge. The deadline was tomorrow morning. $50,000 was on the line, but more importantly, so was everyone's pride. Daniel had made it crystal clear during the kickoff meeting that whoever solved this challenge would be promoted to Vice President of Innovation, a position that came with a corner office, a massive raise, and the kind of prestige that could define a career. But he'd also made it equally clear that anyone who failed to even come close, who couldn't show meaningful progress, would be updating their resume and looking for work elsewhere. The pressure was crushing. You could feel it in the air on the 40th floor. Executives who normally exuded confidence looked haggard and desperate. People who'd once bragged about their degrees and accomplishments now looked small and defeated. By 9 p.m. on that final night, the executive floor was finally mercifully empty. Marcus had left at 8:45, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Rebecca had stayed until 9, making one last desperate attempt before finally giving up and going home. The rest of the team had scattered throughout the evening, each one trying to pretend they weren't worried about their jobs. Daniel had left at 8, disappointed, but secretly, privately satisfied. If his best people couldn't solve it, people he was paying obscene amounts of money, people with walls full of degrees and awards, then it truly was impossible. And being the only one who could solve impossible problems, even if he couldn't solve this particular one, was what kept him on top. The mystique of impossibility served him just as well as actual solutions. The whiteboards in the main conference room were covered in crossed-out equations, circled dead ends, arrows pointing to abandoned theories. It looked like the aftermath of an intellectual battle, and everyone had lost. Sophia arrived at her usual time, 10 p.m. exactly. She badged in through the service entrance, collected her cleaning cart from the supply closet, and began her nightly rounds. She'd developed a precise routine over 3 years. Start with the break rooms, then the individual offices, then the conference rooms, finish with the executive suite. Every night the same pattern, the same movements, the same invisible presence. She pushed her cart past the main conference room, and as always, she glanced briefly through the glass walls at the whiteboards inside. She'd watched this particular problem develop over the past 2 weeks. She'd seen it evolve from a simple statement of the challenge to increasingly desperate attempts at solutions. She'd watched the equations grow more complex, more convoluted, as the team threw everything they had at the problem. Tonight, she could see the final state of their efforts. It looked hopeless. The whiteboards were full, but nothing connected. Nothing flowed. It was just noise, intelligent noise, certainly. These were smart people making educated attempts, but it was still just noise. Sophia was about to move on when she noticed something. A coffee cup on the conference table. Just one, left behind by someone too exhausted to remember basic cleanup. Company policy was strict. All food and beverage waste had to be removed nightly for health and safety reasons. The conference room was technically off limits during active projects, but that cup meant she had to go in. She unlocked the door with her master key, stepped inside, and the automatic lights flickered on, flooding the room with harsh fluorescent brightness. She picked up the coffee cup, still half full, cold, probably Marcus's based on the lipstick stain that definitely wasn't, and turned to leave. That's when she saw it. Really saw it. The problem in its entirety, spread across 4 different whiteboards like a story told in mathematical language. And in that single instant, with the cold coffee cup still in her hand, Sophia saw exactly what everyone had missed. It wasn't that the solution was complicated. It wasn't that it required some brilliant leap of logic or some advanced calculation that only a genius could perform. It was much simpler than that. They were approaching the problem from the wrong direction entirely. Everyone had been treating it as an optimization problem, trying to make the existing system more efficient. But it wasn't an optimization problem at all. It was a structural problem. The latency wasn't something to be reduced within the current framework. The latency existed because of the framework itself. You didn't need to optimize the system. You needed to fundamentally restructure how the system worked in the first place. Sophia stood there, coffee cup in hand, staring at weeks of failed calculations, and saw the answer with perfect clarity. It was so obvious, so breathtakingly obvious. How had an entire room full of brilliant people missed something so fundamental? Her hand moved before her mind could stop it. Before she could remember who she was now, before she could remember that she was nobody, that she'd given up the right to solve problems 5 years ago, she set down the coffee cup, picked up a dry erase marker from the tray, and stepped up to the whiteboard. For the first time in 5 years, Dr. Sophia Rivera allowed herself to think like an engineer again. Sophia didn't write much. She didn't need to. The beauty of truly elegant solutions is their simplicity. In the empty corner of the main whiteboard, in the space everyone else had left blank because they'd run out of ideas, she wrote 4 lines of equations, just 4 lines. Clean, precise, elegant. Her handwriting was different from the aggressive scrawls of the executives who'd been working on this problem. Their writing looked violent, desperate, full of crossed-out mistakes and frustrated revisions. Sophia's writing was calm, confident, almost beautiful in its mathematical simplicity. The first line established the new structural framework, not optimizing the existing system, but reimagining how data packets could be routed entirely. The second line showed the calculation for reduced latency under this new structure. The third line demonstrated that power consumption would actually decrease, not stay the same, because the new routing was fundamentally more efficient. The fourth line proved that the whole thing was scalable across their entire satellite network. 4 lines. That's all it took, 60 seconds. That's how long she stood there, marker in hand, writing out the solution that had eluded a team of PhDs for 2 solid weeks. When she finished, Sophia stepped back and looked at what she'd written. She felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years, that quiet, profound satisfaction of a problem solved. That moment of clarity when chaos becomes order, when the impossible becomes possible, when your mind touches something true and real and beautiful. For 60 seconds, she wasn't the broken woman who'd lost her daughter. She wasn't the ghost pushing a cleaning cart through empty hallways. She was Dr. Sophia Rivera again, and she was brilliant, and it felt like coming home after a long, painful exile. Then reality crashed back like a wave of ice water. What had she done? She'd broken protocol by writing on a client whiteboard. She could be fired for this. 3 years of reliable, invisible work, destroyed in 60 seconds because she couldn't help herself. But more than that, much more than that, she'd exposed herself. Someone would see these equations tomorrow morning. Someone would wonder who had written them. Her invisibility, her carefully constructed anonymity, the safe little world she'd built where nobody expected anything from her, all of it was at risk. Sophia's heart started pounding. Her hands were shaking. She should erase this right now. She should wipe the whiteboard clean, throw away the coffee cup, lock the door, and pretend she was never here. She could protect her invisibility. She could stay safe, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. She stood there, marker still in her hand, staring at those 4 lines of equations, and some small part of her, the part that had been silent for 5 years, needed this solution to exist in the world. Even if it was anonymous, even if no one ever knew it was her, after 5 years of silence, after 5 years of being nobody, she needed to have solved one problem, just one. Sophia capped the marker carefully and placed it back exactly where she'd found it. She picked up the coffee cup, checked to make sure she hadn't disturbed anything else, and backed toward the door. She took one last look at the whiteboard, at those 4 lines that proved she was still capable of brilliance, even if she'd never claim credit for it. Then she turned off the lights, locked the door behind her, and continued her rounds as if nothing had happened. But her mind was racing. Her carefully maintained numbness was cracking. She felt anxious and alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. And she wasn't sure if that was good or terrifying, or both. Sophia finished her shift in a fog of anxiety and regret, and something else she couldn't quite name. Every few minutes, she'd think about going back to that conference room and erasing what she'd written. But every time something stopped her. Some small, stubborn part of her that refused to let that solution disappear. She cleaned the break rooms, emptied the trash cans, vacuumed the hallways, all on autopilot while her mind churned. What would happen tomorrow? Would they trace it back to her? Would they fire her? Would they ask questions she didn't want to answer? She clocked out at 6 a.m., just as the first early bird executives were arriving for the deadline meeting. Sophia kept her head down, pushed her cart toward the service elevator, and disappeared. The sun was rising as she left the building, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She barely noticed. She drove home in a daze, took a shower, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if she'd just destroyed the safe, small life she'd built. Meanwhile, back at Crosstech Industries, the executive floor was coming to life. Marcus Chen arrived at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the official deadline meeting, carrying his laptop and wearing the same clothes from yesterday. He hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night at home, running simulations that went nowhere, trying to squeeze out even a 5% improvement so he could show Daniel something, anything that proved he'd tried his best. Rebecca Walsh arrived at 7:15, also looking like she hadn't slept. She'd had actual nightmares about this problem. In one dream, she'd been standing in front of Daniel trying to explain why she'd failed, and the numbers on the whiteboard had turned into laughing faces mocking her. By 7:30, the entire team had assembled in the conference room, all of them wearing expressions of defeat. They were preparing their excuses, their explanations for why the problem was truly impossible, their desperate pitches for why they should keep their jobs despite failing, and that's when Marcus, who'd been pacing near the windows trying to rehearse what he was going to say to Daniel, happened to glance at the main whiteboard. He stopped mid-step. His rehearsed speech died on his lips. He just stared. He said, his voice strange. "Guys, what is this?" Rebecca looked up from her laptop. "What is what?" Marcus pointed at the whiteboard, his hand actually trembling slightly. "This in the corner. These equations. Did one of you work on this last night?" The entire team turned to look. There, in the corner of the whiteboard, were four. Daniel arrived at 7:30 exactly, carrying his usual morning coffee, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, prepared to deliver the news that no one had solved his impossible challenge. He was actually looking forward to it in a twisted way. He'd already drafted the speech in his mind, something about the importance of knowing one's limitations, about how true strength comes from acknowledging when you're outmatched. But when he walked into the conference room, something was immediately wrong. His team wasn't sitting around the table looking defeated. They were all standing at the whiteboard, clustered together, talking excitedly over each other like students who'd just discovered something remarkable. "What's going on?" Daniel's voice cut through the excited chatter like a knife. His entire team turned to look at him. Marcus stepped forward, his face flushed with something between excitement and confusion. "Sir," Marcus said, "someone solved it. These equations in the corner of the whiteboard, they're not from any of us. But I've been checking the math for the past 20 minutes. Sir, it's correct. This is the solution." Daniel's carefully maintained composure cracked for just a moment. He set his coffee down with deliberate care and approached the whiteboard. The equations were written in handwriting he didn't recognize, too careful, too precise. None of his aggressive, ego-driven executives wrote like this. This handwriting looked almost gentle, but the content was anything but gentle. Daniel's eyes scanned the 4 lines of equations, and he understood immediately. He'd been working on this problem for days, had internalized every aspect of it. He could see in an instant that whoever wrote this had solved it. More than solved it, they'd made it look easy. They'd approached the problem from a completely different direction, one so obvious in hindsight that Daniel felt a flash of anger at himself for missing it. This wasn't just a solution. This was elegant. This was the work of someone who didn't just understand the math, but understood the underlying principles at a level that surpassed anyone in this room, including him. "Who wrote this?" Daniel's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcus pulled up the security access log on his tablet. "The last person to badge out last night was me, sir. At 9:15 p.m. The room was locked after that, according to the system. No one had badge access until security unlocked it this morning at 6 a.m. for the cleaning crew. Then how did this get here?" Daniel was staring at the equations like they were a personal insult. Someone had walked into his building, solved his impossible problem, and made his entire executive team look like amateurs. And he had no idea who. "Pull the security footage," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for discussion. "Every camera on this floor from 9 p.m. until 6 a.m. I want to know who wrote this. I want to know right now." His security team moved fast when Daniel used that tone. They had the footage pulled up within 30 minutes, scanning through hours of empty hallways and locked doors. The timestamp showed 11:23 p.m. when something finally happened. A woman in a teal cleaning uniform entered the frame, pushing her cart down the hallway. She stopped at the conference room door, seemed to hesitate for a moment, then unlocked it with what looked like a master key and went inside. "Zoom in," Daniel commanded, leaning closer to the screen. The footage showed the woman inside the conference room now, picking up something from the table. A coffee cup, probably. Then she paused, standing perfectly still, staring at the whiteboards. Just standing there for what felt like a long time. 30 seconds. 40. Like she was reading a book written in mathematics. Then she moved to the whiteboard. She picked up a marker. And she started writing. The angle wasn't perfect. The camera was positioned for security, not for capturing whiteboard work, but they could see her arm moving in quick, confident strokes. No hesitation, no crossouts. She wrote for exactly 63 seconds according to the timestamp, then stepped back, looked at her work for a moment, carefully replaced the marker, picked up the cleaning supplies, and left the room. Rewind to when she enters the frame. Zoom in on her badge. The security officer enhanced the image. The name on the badge read Sophia Rivera, employee number 7734, janitorial services. 3 years with the company. Daniel stared at the screen in complete disbelief. His cleaning lady, the woman who'd been emptying his trash can every single night for 3 years. The person so invisible he couldn't recall ever actually looking at her face. That woman had just solved an engineering problem that stumped his entire team of PhDs. People he'd recruited from the top universities. People he was paying obscene salaries. "Find her," Daniel said, his voice quiet, but with an edge that made everyone in the room immediately start moving. "I want her in my office today. I want her here now." Marcus was already pulling up employee records. "Sir, she works night shift. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. She's probably at home sleeping right now. I don't care. Call her. Wake her up. Tell her I need to see her immediately. Tell her it's urgent." Daniel was still staring at the screen. At the freeze frame of Sophia Rivera standing at the whiteboard, marker in hand, solving his impossible problem like it was nothing. Sophia was indeed at home, lying in bed but definitely not sleeping. She'd been staring at her ceiling for hours, replaying the events of last night in her mind, wondering if she'd just ruined everything. When her phone rang and the number showed Crosstech Industries, her heart dropped into her stomach. "Ms. Rivera?" The voice on the other end was professional but urgent. "This is Marcus Chen, Chief Technology Officer at Crosstech. I'm calling on behalf of Mr. Cross. He needs you to come to the office immediately. We need to discuss something that happened last night." Sophia's hands were shaking as she ended the call. This was it. She was going to be fired for touching a client whiteboard. 3 years of invisible, reliable work, destroyed in 60 seconds because she couldn't help herself. Because she'd let herself be Dr. Rivera for one brief moment instead of staying nobody. She got dressed in her civilian clothes, jeans and a simple blouse, nothing fancy. She'd never been in the Crosstech building during daylight hours before. Everything looked different in natural light, brighter, more intimidating. She arrived at noon, her stomach churning with anxiety. The receptionist at the main desk gave her a visitor badge like she didn't work here, like she was a guest, and directed her to the 40th floor. The 40th floor. The executive suite, the domain of people with corner offices and expensive suits and walls covered in degrees. Sophia had cleaned these halls for 3 years, but always in darkness, always when they were empty. Now they were full of people in business attire, everyone looking important and purposeful, and she felt completely out of place in her jeans. The elevator ride felt endless. When the doors opened, Daniel's assistant was waiting. She was young, perfectly put together, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Sophia's monthly rent. "Miss Rivera, Mr. Cross is expecting you. Please, follow me." They walked down a hallway Sophia had pushed her cart through hundreds of times. But in daylight, with people actually present, it felt like a completely different place. They stopped at a door at the very end, solid wood, probably mahogany, with a nameplate that read, "Daniel Cross, Chief Executive Officer." The assistant knocked once, then opened the door. "Ms. Rivera is here, sir." Daniel's office was exactly what Sophia expected. Massive, intimidating, designed to make visitors feel small. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Modern art on the walls. A desk the size of a small car. And behind that desk, standing with his back to the door, looking out at the city, was Daniel Cross himself. He didn't turn when she entered. "Sit down, Miss Rivera." His voice was cold, controlled. This was the voice of someone who was used to being obeyed instantly. Sophia sat on the edge of the leather chair facing his desk, hands clasped in her lap, waiting for the termination speech she knew was coming. Daniel finally turned to face her. He was tall, mid-40s, wearing a suit that probably cost $5,000. His expression was unreadable, not quite angry, but definitely not friendly. "Last night," he said slowly, "you entered the executive conference room. You wrote equations on the whiteboard, equations that solved a problem my entire team of PhDs and industry experts couldn't crack in 2 weeks. Equations that are, according to my chief technology officer, some of the most elegant solutions he's ever seen." Sophia kept her eyes down. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched the whiteboard." It won't happen again. There was a long pause. Then Daniel's voice came again, and this time there was something different in it. Confusion, genuine puzzlement. That's what you're apologizing for? Touching the whiteboard. Sophia looked up, meeting his eyes for the first time. She saw genuine confusion there and something else. A crack in his carefully maintained arrogance. Like he'd encountered something he couldn't understand and it was throwing off his entire worldview. "Ms. Rivera," Daniel said, moving closer to his desk but not sitting down. "I don't care about the whiteboard. I want to know how you solved a problem that shouldn't have been solvable. I want to know how a cleaning lady walks into a room and, in 60 seconds, accomplishes what my $1 million team couldn't do in 2 weeks." The way he said cleaning lady wasn't quite an insult, but it wasn't respectful either. It was said like someone trying to reconcile two incompatible facts, like someone's entire understanding of the world was being challenged by reality. Sophia took a breath. This was the moment. She could lie. She could make something up. She could protect her invisibility, keep her safe little world intact, or she could tell the truth and let that world shatter completely. "I saw the error in your team's approach," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the anxiety churning in her stomach. "They were treating it as an optimization problem when it's actually a systems integration problem. The solution isn't about doing more with less. It's about restructuring the entire framework to eliminate the latency bottleneck at the source. Once you understand that, the equations are straightforward." Daniel sat down slowly in his chair, never breaking eye contact. "You talk like an engineer." "I was an engineer," Sophia said. "A long time ago. What kind of engineer solves satellite communication problems in 60 seconds while cleaning an office at midnight?" And there it was. The question she'd known was coming. The question that would force her to either lie or reveal everything she'd spent 5 years trying to hide. Sophia met his gaze directly. "The kind who used to work for NASA." The silence in Daniel's office was absolute. He was staring at Sophia like she'd just spoken in a language he didn't know existed. His carefully constructed composure had completely crumbled. He looked genuinely shocked, which Sophia suspected didn't happen often to a man like Daniel Cross. "NASA," he repeated slowly, like he was testing the word in his mouth to see if it was real. "You worked for NASA?" "Yes." "Doing what exactly?" "Aerospace engineering. Applied mathematics. I worked on Mars mission trajectory calculations and satellite system optimizations for 5 years. Before that, I completed my doctorate at Caltech." Daniel leaned back in his chair, processing this information. "You have a doctorate, 2, actually. Aerospace engineering and applied mathematics. You have 2 PhDs, Daniel said, and his voice had changed from cold authority to something else entirely. Confusion mixed with a reluctant respect. "And you've been cleaning my office for 3 years?" "Yes. Why?" That was the question Sophia had known was inevitable. The question she'd been dreading. "Because how do you explain to a stranger why you threw away everything you'd worked for? How do you tell someone about the worst moment of your life without falling apart?" "Because I needed to disappear," Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because 5 years ago I made a choice that cost my daughter her life, and I couldn't be Dr. Rivera anymore. I couldn't be the person who valued equations and calculations and career achievements. I needed to become someone simple, someone who couldn't hurt anyone with her ambition." Daniel's expression shifted. The arrogance that usually armored him fell away completely, replaced by something that looked almost like understanding. "What happened?" Sophia took a shaky breath. She hadn't talked about this, really talked about it, in 5 years. But something about this moment, about sitting in this intimidating office with this powerful man who was looking at her like she was actually a person and not just an invisible service worker, made the words come. I was working on a critical deadline, a calculation that absolutely had to be finished that day. At least, that's what I told myself. My daughter Emma called from school. She was 8. She wanted to know when I was picking her up. I told her I'd be there soon, that I just needed to finish this one thing. I asked our neighbor to pick her up instead. Sophia's voice was steady, but her hands were clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. There was an accident. A driver running a red light hit Mrs. Chen's car. Emma was in the back seat. The impact was instantaneous. She never suffered. That's what the doctors told me, as if that was supposed to make it better. As if knowing she didn't suffer would somehow erase the fact that she died because I chose work over her. Daniel didn't say anything. He just listened, and there was something in his expression that Sophia couldn't quite read. Not pity exactly. Something deeper than that. I was finishing my calculation when I got the call, Sophia continued. I'd actually solved the problem I was working on. I remember feeling proud of myself for figuring it out. I was smiling when my phone rang. And then my entire world ended. She looked up at Daniel and her eyes were dry but filled with a pain that time hadn't diminished at all. The guilt was suffocating. It still is. I couldn't look at equations without seeing Emma's face. I couldn't step into a laboratory without hearing her voice on that last phone call saying, "I love you, Mommy," before hanging up. I couldn't be Dr. Rivera anymore because Dr. Rivera had chosen work over her child, and her child had died because of that choice. "So you walked away from everything," Daniel said quietly. "I walked away from NASA, from my research, from colleagues who called me a genius and predicted I'd change the world. I walked away from the person I'd been my entire adult life because I couldn't be her anymore. That person had failed in the most important way possible." Sophia's voice grew stronger, more determined. "I took the first job that required nothing from my mind, just my hands and my silence. I needed to disappear. I needed to become no one. I needed a job where nobody would look at me or expect anything from me or ask me to be brilliant. I needed to punish myself by erasing everything I'd accomplished." "So you became a cleaning lady," Daniel said, and there was no judgment in his voice now, just understanding. "I became invisible. For 3 years it worked. I pushed my cart through these hallways every night and felt nothing. The numbness was almost comfortable. I didn't have to think. I didn't have to be brilliant. I didn't have to carry the weight of potential or ambition or achievement. I could just exist in this small, safe space where nobody wanted anything from me. Until last night," Daniel said. "Until last night," Sophia agreed. "I should have just picked up the coffee cup and left. But I saw your team's work on the whiteboard, and I couldn't help myself. Just for 60 seconds, I let myself be Dr. Rivera again. And now," she gestured at the office around them. "Now here I am about to be fired for breaking protocol." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood up and walked to the windows, looking out at the city below. When he spoke, his voice was different, softer, more thoughtful than Sophia had ever heard it. "I'm not firing you," he said finally. "I'm offering you a job, Chief Innovation Officer. You'd lead our entire research and development division. $200,000 base salary plus significant equity. You'd have a team of engineers reporting to you, engineers with credentials from MIT and Stanford and Caltech. You'd have unlimited resources and full authority to restructure our approach to satellite systems and any other problems you want to tackle." Sophia shook her head immediately. A reflex action. "I can't." Daniel turned to face her. "Can't or won't. Both." She stood up, preparing to leave, to run back to her safe, small world before this conversation destroyed her completely. "Mr. Cross, I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I'm not that person anymore. I gave up engineering for a reason. I don't want to go back to being Dr. Rivera. I can't go back. Even though you're clearly still brilliant at it," Daniel challenged. "Even though you solved in 1 minute what my team couldn't solve in 2 weeks? Even though that mind of yours is obviously still working at full capacity whether you want it to or not?" "Especially because of that," Sophia said, and her voice had an edge of desperation now. "That's exactly the problem. When I'm working on something complex and fascinating, I lose track of everything else. Time doesn't exist. People don't exist. Priorities shift until the only thing that matters is solving the problem. That's what killed my daughter. My ability to focus so completely on intellectual challenges that nothing else matters. I can't let myself go back to that. I won't." Daniel moved around his desk to face her directly, no barriers between them now. His voice was gentle but firm. "What if I told you that watching you solve that problem in 60 seconds and then walk away taught me more about intelligence and priorities than my entire education?" "I'd say you're trying to manipulate me into accepting your offer," Sophia replied. "Maybe, Daniel admitted with a slight smile. But I'd also be telling the truth. Do you know what I do, Ms. Rivera? I test people. I give them impossible problems and watch them fail, and it makes me feel superior. It validates my sense that I'm special, that I'm smarter than everyone else. It's how I maintain power and status in my own mind. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically uncertain. But you know what you did? You solved my impossible problem like it was nothing, and then you walked away like it didn't matter. Like your job mopping floors was just as valuable as saving my company millions of dollars and potentially revolutionizing our entire satellite network. You didn't need recognition. You didn't need to prove anything. You just solved the problem and moved on. Because it doesn't matter, Sophia said firmly. The problem, the solution, the recognition, none of it matters compared to being a decent human being. That's something you should have learned without needing a cleaning lady to solve your equation. The words hung in the air between them. Daniel realized he was being called out by someone who had every reason to resent him, someone he'd ignored for 3 years, someone whose job he'd probably looked down on without even thinking about it, but who instead was simply stating a truth he'd spent his entire career avoiding. You're absolutely right, Daniel said, and the admission seemed to cost him something. I've spent my whole life believing that people's value is determined by their credentials, their titles, their visible achievements. And I've surrounded myself with people who validate that belief because they all have the same prestigious pedigrees I do. He walked back to the windows. But in 1 minute, you made every expensive degree in this building irrelevant. Not because you're smarter than everyone else, though you clearly are, but because you see problems differently. You don't have the ego investment that comes with needing to be the smartest person in the room. You solved the problem because that's what your mind does naturally. Not because you needed to prove something. Sophia remained standing by the chair, uncertain where this conversation was going, uncertain what Daniel Cross wanted from her. I don't want you to be Chief Innovation Officer, Daniel continued, turning back to face her. I don't want you to run a team or sit in meetings or play corporate politics. I want you to be exactly what you are, someone who can see things clearly because you're not caught up in hierarchy or prestige or career advancement. But I also don't want you emptying trash cans when you could be solving problems that actually matter. I don't want to change the world, Sophia said quietly. I just want to survive each day without hurting anyone, without losing myself in work again, without making the same mistakes that cost me everything. What if you could do both? Daniel's voice was gentler now, almost kind. What if there was a way to use your gifts without letting them consume your life? What if you could choose to engage with problems that matter on your own terms, with boundaries that you define and control? For the first time, Sophia hesitated. The wall she'd built around herself for 5 years, the protective numbness, the deliberate invisibility, the absolute refusal to be brilliant again, was cracking. Not because Daniel was offering her money or prestige or validation, but because he was offering her something she hadn't realized she needed. Permission to be brilliant without being destructive. Permission to use her gifts without losing her humanity. I would need rules, she said slowly, testing the words as she spoke them. Strict boundaries. No working past 6 p.m. ever. No taking work home. No canceling personal plans for professional deadlines. No sacrificing human connection for achievement. If I feel myself slipping back into old patterns, I walk away immediately. No arguments, no negotiations, no guilt trips. Done, Daniel agreed without hesitation. All of it, and I don't want to be in charge of people. I don't want to manage anyone or be responsible for their careers or have anyone depending on me for direction. I can't handle that kind of responsibility. What if you were an independent consultant? Daniel proposed. You work on specific problems as they arise, but you're not embedded in daily operations. You maintain complete autonomy. You decide when to engage and when to step back. You're not part of the hierarchy. You're outside it. Sophia considered this. It wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't the all-or-nothing choice she'd thought she would have to make. It was something in between. A way to be Dr. Rivera sometimes, in controlled doses, without letting that identity consume her entire life again. But could she trust herself? Could she trust that she wouldn't fall back into the same patterns that had destroyed her life before? Why are you doing this? Sophia asked, studying Daniel's face for any hint of manipulation or hidden agenda. You could hire someone with an active engineering career, someone who's still publishing papers and attending conferences, someone without all my baggage and trauma and broken pieces. Why would you want me? Daniel smiled, and it was the first genuine, unguarded smile Sophia had seen from him. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger and more human. Because watching you solve an impossible problem and then walk away from recognition taught me something I desperately needed to learn, he said honestly. That brilliance without humanity is just ego. That intelligence without empathy is just loneliness wearing an expensive suit. That all my credentials and achievements and carefully cultivated superiority complex are meaningless if I can't see the value in people who don't fit my narrow definition of worth. He extended his hand across the desk. Work with me, Sophia. Not for me, with me. Help me build something that actually matters, in a way that doesn't cost you everything you care about. Help me create a company where intelligence and humanity aren't in conflict, where success doesn't require sacrificing who you are. Sophia looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment. 5 years ago, she'd walked away from everything because she couldn't face who she'd become. She'd convinced herself that brilliance and humanity were incompatible, that using her gifts meant abandoning her values, that she had to choose between being smart and being good. Now she was being offered a different path, not a return to who she was before Emma died, but a chance to become someone new, someone who could be brilliant without being consumed, someone who could solve problems without losing sight of what truly mattered. She thought about Emma, about what her daughter would want for her. Emma had loved hearing about her mom's work at NASA. She'd been so proud when Sophia explained complex problems in simple terms. She'd wanted to be an astronaut herself someday. Would Emma want her mom to spend the rest of her life hiding in the shadows, punishing herself, refusing to use the gifts she'd been given? Or would Emma want her to find a way to honor both her intelligence and her humanity? Sophia knew the answer. She'd always known the answer. She just hadn't been ready to accept it until now. She took Daniel's hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. Okay, she said, her voice steady. But the moment I feel myself slipping back into old patterns, the moment work starts to matter more than life, I walk away. No questions, no negotiations, no attempts to convince me otherwise. Deal, Daniel said. Welcome to CrossTech, Dr. Rivera. Your first project is teaching my executive team how you think. Not what you know. I can hire people who know things. I want you to teach them how to see problems differently, how to question assumptions, how to value insight over credentials. As Sophia left his office that afternoon, she felt something she hadn't felt in 5 years. Not happiness, exactly. The grief over Emma would never truly disappear. But hope. The quiet, cautious hope that maybe, just maybe, she could find a way to live that honored both who she'd been and who she'd become. Daniel watched her go, and for the first time in his career, he understood something profound. The smartest person in his building had been invisible for 3 years because he'd never learned to look beyond credentials and titles, because he'd never understood that intelligence comes in many forms, and that brilliance can be found in the most unexpected places. Over the following weeks, Sophia started working with CrossTech's engineering team. She didn't lead them. She'd been firm about that boundary. Instead, she would come in 3 days a week, from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., strict hours that she never violated. She'd look at whatever problem they were stuck on, ask questions that seemed simple but weren't, and help them see solutions from unexpected angles. The team was skeptical at first. These were people with advanced degrees and years of experience. Who was this quiet woman in casual clothes to tell them how to approach problems? But within 2 sessions, that skepticism transformed into respect. Sophia had a gift for understanding not just the technical aspects of a problem, but the human thinking patterns that created obstacles. Marcus Chen, the CTO who'd first discovered her solution, became one of her strongest advocates. She doesn't just solve problems, he told Daniel. She teaches us to think differently, to question our assumptions, to value insight over complexity. I've learned more from her in a month than I learned in my entire PhD program. Daniel found himself watching Sophia work with genuine fascination. She was nothing like the aggressive, competitive engineers he usually hired. She listened more than she spoke. She asked questions instead of making pronouncements. She made people feel intelligent rather than intimidated. And somehow, problems that had seemed impossible would simply resolve. Not through brilliant displays of mathematical acrobatics, but through clear thinking and human understanding. But the most remarkable thing was watching Sophia rebuild herself. She maintained her boundaries religiously. 6 p.m. meant 6 p.m., no exceptions. She never took work home. She never canceled personal plans for deadlines. And slowly, gradually, Sophia started to allow herself to be brilliant again without letting it consume her. She started attending support groups for grieving parents. She reconnected with old friends from Caltech who'd respected her decision to step away but were thrilled to have her back in their lives. She even started volunteering at a local school, helping kids with science projects, teaching them that being smart didn't mean you had to sacrifice everything else. One evening, 6 months after that first conversation in Daniel's office, Sophia was leaving Crosstech headquarters when Daniel caught up with her in the lobby. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. "I wanted to show you something." He led her back to the conference room where everything had started. The whiteboards had been cleaned and rewritten dozens of times since that night, but Daniel pointed to the corner where Sophia had written her solution. "We've kept it," he said. "I had it photographed and framed. It hangs in our innovation lab now, not because of the solution itself, though we've made millions from implementing it, but because of what it represents." Sophia looked at the photograph of her 4 lines of equations, preserved forever. "It represents the moment I learned to see people I'd been ignoring," Daniel continued. "The moment I understood that intelligence isn't about credentials or titles, that the most valuable people are sometimes the ones we overlook because they don't fit our narrow expectations. You changed more than just our satellite systems, Sophia. You changed how I see the world." Sophia smiled, and it was genuine. "And you gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever, the ability to be brilliant without losing my humanity. To use my gifts without sacrificing everything else." They stood there for a moment, 2 people who'd both been transformed by an unexpected encounter in the middle of the night. "Thank you," Sophia said quietly, "for seeing me, for giving me a chance to find balance, for understanding that brilliance doesn't have to come at the cost of everything else." "Thank you," Daniel replied, "for teaching me that sometimes the smartest thing you can do is walk away from the need to be the smartest person in the room. That real intelligence includes knowing what matters and what doesn't." As Sophia walked out of Crosstech that evening, she thought about Emma. She thought about the little girl who'd wanted to be an astronaut, who'd been so proud of her brilliant mom. And she knew, really knew, in the deepest part of her heart, that Emma would be proud of who she'd become. Not just because she was using her gifts again, but because she'd learned to use them wisely, to value life over achievement, to be brilliant without losing sight of what truly mattered. Sometimes the most valuable people are the ones we overlook. Sometimes genius wears a cleaning uniform and works night shifts in empty hallways. Sometimes the impossible problem isn't the equation on the whiteboard. It's learning to see the humanity in everyone around us, regardless of where they sit in the hierarchy we've created. And sometimes, finding your way back to yourself means learning that you don't have to choose between being brilliant and being human. You can be both. You just need the courage to set boundaries, the wisdom to know what matters, and the grace to forgive yourself for past mistakes. Sophia had found that balance. And in doing so, she'd taught everyone around her that true intelligence includes understanding that every person has value, every job has dignity, and every life contains hidden depths. We'll never see if we don't take the time to look. What did you think of Daniel and Sophia's story? Rate it from 0 to 10 in the comments below. My favorite moment was when Sophia told Daniel that brilliance without humanity is just ego. That one line completely captured the heart of this entire story. What was your favorite moment? Have you ever been overlooked because of your job title or position? Or maybe you've overlooked someone else's brilliance because of assumptions you made. Share your experience in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And if this tale of hidden genius, second chances, and learning to balance brilliance with humanity touched your heart, Subscribe to Deep Stories for more emotional narratives that remind us to see the value in everyone we meet. We publish new stories 3 times every week, stories that challenge how we see the world and the people in it. Remember, sometimes the smartest person in the room is the one everyone's been ignoring. Sometimes genius is invisible until we take the time to truly see. Thank you for being part of our Deep Stories family. See you in the next one.